Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Bühler. I'm responsible for Lunch Bytes, a series of talks and discussions that center on art and digital culture. Today's Lunch Bytes talk is entitled on releasing, distributing, and exhibiting art online. It is a collaboration with the Kunsthalle Basel and Art Basel. I would like to thank the Kunsthalle for this collaboration, especially Fabian Schöneich. He co-conceptualized this talk together with me. And of course, from Art Basel, Claudio Vogt. He made this panel possible. Here with me on stage, we have Domenico Quaranta, Ben Vickers, Oliver Laric, and Aleksandra Domanović. We will introduce them a little bit more later. Let's go back to the topic of the talk. For many artists today, releasing and distributing their art online has become common practice. Placing their work on platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Tumblr, as well as their own websites, where it can be viewed, discussed, and evaluated. These online distribution strategies have the potential to incite new ways of circulating work, establish new formats of criticism, and introduce new context for the perception of art. Making use of these platforms, however, also evokes questions concerning the kind of communicative and aesthetic implications these formats introduce. For instance, how platform-specific infrastructures and protocols affect the way we perceive, comment on, and value art. Aside from these platforms that I have just mentioned, a number of startups and initiatives have surfaced that exclusively aim to showcase art online. Artist-run blogs are an example of this, but one could also think of more institutionalized formats, such as the online biennial, in which actually 3 of our panelists today were involved, the Adobe Museum of Digital Media, or Google Art Project. This raises the question of how established formats of presenting and curating art in an offline context are translated into these online settings, and what consequences are attached to these transitions. It also leads to the question regarding the material differences between on and online spaces, the norms and expectations native to these spaces, and the extent to which these spaces are in fact mutually constitutive. To start the discussion, we have asked each panelist to answer a question we have prepared for them.
Hello. Yeah, to get like a first overview of the practice of the artists as well as the curators, we would like to start with you, Aleksandra. You're an artist based in Berlin, and your work is on one hand side kind of based online, and on the other side it exists as a physical piece for exhibition spaces or institutions. And to that effect, I would like to ask you specifically about the work that's titled 1930, that we can already see, and that is kind of one of these works that exists in these 2 formats or materials. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just tell us something about it.
Okay, so 1930 is an anthology of television news music from the geographical region of former Yugoslavia. And it is also an ongoing collection of remixes, edits, and diverse other iterations of the music that I gathered. So when I talk about television news music, I mean TV idents, which in TV jargon means these little bits of graphics and music that are used in the beginning of a news show to demarcate the beginning of the show. And the title 1930 comes from the time slot when the nightly Yugoslav news used to air, so 1930s, 7:30, when the central evening news broadcast would start. And this was a kind of centralizing point of the day. You know, before internet, where you could get your content on demand, you had to watch news live, so people would organize their daily routine around this show. And the way this project came about is that I accidentally heard one such ident online from the early 90s. I heard it on YouTube, and it brought back so many memories. It was like a big emotional reaction that I had to it. But at the same time, also, it sounded like techno music. It just needed a beat to make it, danceable. So I can play you this this one ident that I heard. Yeah. And so my first idea was just to make I just wanted to make a techno remix of this track. But just a few Google searches or YouTube searches, and I realized there were already 3 remixes out there, and one was professional, 2 amateur, and then, of course, I realized that this was not my intimate experience. It was quite public, and if I had such an emotional reaction, I was wondering what the other people would feel. And I decided to take this project as extended, push it as far as possible, and I decided to collect all the idents, the news idents, from the beginning of television in Yugoslavia, 58, to the present, and put it online and make it available for anybody to download and remix and use. But to do this, I realized these idents weren't online, and this was the first. Before, I always worked with content online, so the images, video, music, whatever. And this wasn't available online, so I actually had to go there and visit every national archive of each republic and gather the material. And so I have to say that, and later I uploaded it all on this website. And I have to say that I enjoyed the role of the uploader much better than the role of a downloader. So I put them online, and I asked people to make remixes. So there's the archive, there's the collection of remixes, there's also a video, a PDF publication, a record on vinyl, there's a series of parties that I've done under this project. So there's multiple manifestations of one work, and some of it I show in the gallery spaces, museums, like real spaces, but most of the project is actually online. And I see the website as a kind of a backbone that carries all of this, the archive. And it's basically about getting combining 2 collective experiences, which were both very emotionally charged. And one is this collective viewing of news, which is mostly associated with the breakup of former Yugoslavia, because when the war started, the news became even more important. So 1930, the streets were empty. Everybody's watching the news. And then kind of this another experience, which is more my generation, which was rave parties and techno, which came later after the war, 95, 96. And this was also, in a way, emotionally charged, but mostly with, at least for my generation, kind of like, it had to do with re-establishing social connections than the opposite. Okay, I guess that's it.
That was a detailed explanation, which is great because, as you said, 1930 exists online as an archive, as a backbone of the entire work complex, and it's maybe also a good point to talk about Oliver Laric, an Austrian artist also based in Berlin, and earlier this year, the first, or they claimed to be, the first online biennial was launched. An exhibition that happened online, an exhibition that you can enter and to see artworks by selected artists. The administration of this online biennial invited several curators that, again, selected several artists that present work online. And your work that often deals with, on one hand side, reproduction and the potential of a copy, also deals with like the potential of this kind of display of artworks online. So you were invited to present the work, and you created a site-specific work that's titled An Incomplete Timeline of Online Exhibitions and Biennials, which was probably also more a reaction than a contribution to the exhibition. So I would like to ask you about the idea of this timeline and the potential of that.
Yeah, so I was invited to take part in this show, and as Fabian mentioned, the show makes the claim to be the first online biennial, which in 2013 does not seem accurate, and it's not accurate. So I replied to the organizers, letting them know that there have been several previous online biennials, as far back as 10 years, to which they replied that these don't count because they don't have Wikipedia entries. Which is also not accurate, because some of them actually do have Wikipedia entries. Mm-hmm. But also I think that if things don't exist on Wikipedia, they still exist. So I decided still to participate, and I was curious to find out more about art being shown online and how early did this happen. So I asked people that I know were involved in showing art online, or that knew somebody who was involved in showing art online in the early 90s. And I spent quite a bit of time on it and gathered as much information as I could, and I made an incomplete timeline of online exhibitions and biennials. It's online. I'm going to try to. So. Okay, sorry for the scroll. Okay, this is what it looks like. At the top, I credit some of the people who made it possible. It begins with 1991, The Thing. This was still, it took form as a dial-up bulletin board, but soon you had first websites like artnetweb.com or AdaWeb, that was a quite influential early site hosting works by Jody or Lawrence Weiner or General Idea. And I think the specific thing about these websites is that it was not necessarily art that was documented on the website, but the art was taking place on the websites. So it was it's an immersive experience as opposed to mere documentation. As the internet gets more populated, I mean, you just see this in chronological order, there are obviously more and more shows, some of them with institutional funding or support, like the DIA project, or a website that was part of Documenta in 1997. Walker Art Center had an online part, and it keeps on going. This is, for example, an early online biennial 10 years ago that actually happened every 2 years. Mm-hmm. I think that's also, a biennial only exists once it happens the second time, right? Otherwise, it's not a biennial yet. So this one really is a biennial. I don't think I can really go into details, but in any case, you can look at it if you are curious or want to look at some of the links. It's hosted on rhizome.org. Initially, I wanted to show it on this online biennial, but for some reason, they weren't able to show it. They said it was not possible to have outgoing links. It was not a problem for Rhizome in any case, and they are hosting it now. It's also an incomplete timeline, so if there's anybody who has information about other shows that I'm missing, then feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to update it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And now we maybe go a little bit more towards the curatorial practice. And Domenico Quaranta, who's sitting right next to me, he's a curator and critic and co-founder of the Link Center for the Arts of the Information Age in Brescia. Domenico has a lot of experience when it comes to curating both physical shows, but also you've also done some online shows?
Yeah, just one.
Yeah,
I will
one.
tell about it.
Exactly. So for this initial question round, we asked him to talk a little bit about the context of online curating.
Yeah. As I said, I never made online exhibitions. The closest thing that I made to an online exhibition was the online section of a small festival that I did in Slovenia. The budget was very small and we had a lot of online works. So we decided to collect them online in a single platform and to project them in the exhibition space. And in that case, the platform we used was Club Internet, that I think is also in Oliver's list. Club Internet was a platform started by Harm van den Dorpel, which is a Dutch artist, and it was really interesting because it tried to translate to the online experience the time-based experience of exhibitions offline. So basically, when there was no exhibition, the site was closed, and also you have opening hours during the day. After that, the exhibition was not available anymore. And besides that, the website basically encapsulated the artist's work and added a very minimal information in order to access them from the platform. I told about this project because I think that when we start considering online curating, we have to address the fact that actually online the practice of curating has become very has been democratized and probably should be better referred to as and more honestly referred to as linking, blogging, reposting, whatever. No, I mean. Take, for example, the list that Oliver made. It can be considered a simple list. It can be considered an exhibition of exhibitions. An article on a magazine or an essay can be considered an exhibition at the moment in which it also has links to works. So basically everything can be an exhibition online, and I think that if you really want to address curating online, you have to expand this concept, not just to exhibition making, but to the creation of platforms. And of course, many of the sites that are linked on that list can be described as platforms. No? When I talk about platforms, I mean, for example, context that produce work instead of just linking to it, or context in which there is a stronger relationship between all the people involved and a stronger dialogue and the possibility of interacting within each other. And also, another important thing about online curating is probably the fact that it has not been made for the most part by curators. Because of what I said so far, if curating is a totally democratized experience, every people can basically curate something online, and platforms, the most interesting platforms to show works online, have actually been created mostly by artists and not by professional curators. I have also a few examples on the computer, if you... Thank you. It's a... it's a very small and fast slideshow of screenshots. This, for example, is an exhibition, I think, from 1997. It was made by a Russian artist, Alexei Shulgin, and it was basically the idea was to connect different websites in a chain that worked in a way that the page refreshed, and every refresh displayed a different work. You can see the work for about 5-6 seconds, but if you are interested in it, you can click on the page and so separate your experience of the internet from the one provided by the exhibition. Otherwise, you can just follow the flow of pages reloading and reloading until you find what's interesting for you. I think it's a very early example, but it's still very interesting because it basically addresses the internet as a public platform where artworks can exist but can't be framed in a single experience. No? You always have the chance to go out, get outside of the exhibition and make your own way online. This is, I think, the closer thing that I can show to describe what an online museum can be. More than a museum, is actually a database, runme.org, that was done to share and archive software art that was done at the beginning of the 2000s. This is Nasty Nets, a surfing club. A surfing club is basically a blog updated by many people who are usually artists, and around 2005, 2010, most of the most interesting contests online were actually group blogs done by artists. Work is an example of that.
And that was actually
done by yeah, Oliver and Aleksandra. And this is one recent example. Jogging is a platform founded by American artist Brad Trömel and many other contributors. It uses Tumblr as its distribution platform. And so it collected a long time a really broad and different audience, which is completely different from the audience that can be addressed in a specifically art context, but that is anyway feeded with the art experiences, no?
I think,
yeah. Yeah, I can stop here, but the last point that is interesting for me is that today also documentation of art is outsourced to everybody. No? I showed these two pictures because this is actually how I got aware for the first time of this Catalan, Maurizio Catalan work installed here in Basel through what's called online an art selfie. So basically a picture in which you depict yourself into the artwork done by a couple of friends who have an Instagram account. And then later I got in touch with the official picture of the work. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for this. And now we go to Ben Vickers. And Ben writes about himself that he makes a living in understanding how systems of distribution, both human and other, come to affect our perception of reality, which I think is beautiful. Ben was recently appointed curator of digital at Serpentine Gallery and was also one of the curators of the biennial online. Ben, can you tell us a little bit more about your background as a network specialist?
Yes.
And how that and how that relates to the role of the curator that you recently adopted?
Okay. Maybe I'm going to double back a little bit before I talk about the network analysis stuff. So the domain that's up at the moment is foreverconnected.org, which when I let it expire maybe a year ago. I think like around 2010, I started pulling all of my content off the internet. And I think the reason why I bring this up is because I guess I started out as a little bit techno-utopian, and there's a whole series of different disciplines that I've been involved in, have specialized to some degree in. Network analysis is something that I spend quite a lot of time doing at the moment in various different contexts. Prior to that, I did data mining for Sky.com, where very, very early on when I was 18, in order to try and understand how to create abstract data sets around the way that people were viewing content online. Prior to that, I spent 5 years living in a virtual world called Ultima Online. And so, okay, so if we, and then if we skip backwards, these things are kind of important because one of the things that I feel kind of awkward about, not just the title of curator of digital or the assertion that maybe network analysis applies only to social networks like Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that, but these things imply a kind of digital dualism, that there is some differentiation between the offline and the online. And I would personally struggle in my everyday life to articulate what the offline moment is. Some people might be blessed in that they can press the off switch, but I've never been able to find that off switch. So that's like a kind of a random collection of things, but I think that it's the reason why I try to bring those things together is because what I learned very early on in online worlds and things like that, that there's this ability to have a fluidity of identity. And in a moment in which lots and lots of people are documenting everything they do, there's this weird thing that's become the standard for artists to archive and put their work in a chronological order, which is not something that has always been the case. So you have all these kind of odd things happening as a result of the internet and the way that people articulate their artistic practice. So what's the role of the curator in that context? I have only ever adopted the role of curator 2 times. Previously, people had known me as an artist. And I think my role in this moment is to begin to try and break down that general understanding of an online and offline space. And the art world has been quite slow to come to the digital context. I kind of think that the art world will probably never have a Napster moment because the relationships that operate in the art world try to break down the rule sets of the art world all the time. Sorry, I've gone completely blank.
That's fine. That's fine. So, so you were actually talking a little bit like how you see what I mean. If I hear that,
no, I just scattergunned a whole set of things at you that was maybe a little bit unfair because I had quite like a structured format that I was going to work through, and I was going to like tell this narrative of like how I got from this bit to that bit, but maybe to some extent, I'm not completely sure how I got to this bit I ended up sitting in this chair articulating what the digital means for the art world or anything like that. I think that it's important to be really honest about that because I think that like where I came from, I was like dyslexic at the age of 10, so I got given a laptop, and my dad was involved in the .com era and new media and stuff like that, and it just became part of my everyday life.
Yeah.
And I think that where I potentially have some degree, like some sort of unique position in this, is that it's just been part of my everyday life for a very long time.
Yeah.
And only over the last 3 or 4 years has it been part of artists' everyday life. Because it's kind of like work, one thing that's really forgotten is that contemporary art wasn't really on the internet 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So I do think that we're in this very weird moment where there's a kind of tipping point, and I find it very difficult to kind of pull all of this stuff together and say this is what the digital means in the context of curating, because I'm not even sure what those terms really mean anymore.
So is that part of your assignment to kind of define
My
that?
assignment.
As at Serpentine? Is that something you will work on?
Well, undoubtedly. I think if you look at all art institutions in this moment, you had like Tate Modern put out their digital strategy where they say digital is dimension of everything. Every institution is trying to make a move into this space. It's just it's quite a late moment in the game. And what's particularly interesting in trying to do this now and taking an institutional position is the work that was being produced between like 2007 to 2010 was really exciting. And if you were to take the role in an institution in that moment, there was an endless series of artists working that you could just say, yes, we have that, we have this. But all of the artists that have articulated a very strong understanding of what the texture of like digital space and the impact that it's had on our everyday space, all of those artists have switched to producing things offline or that are highly distributed. So maybe it has a website, maybe it has some sculptures. So it's a very like odd moment where as the discourse has moved forward and you have like notions of post-internet and nobody really knowing what that term even means, it's it's a very, very messy terrain. But the problem is that you had a community that sat outside of the mainstream art context for 3 or 4 years, building their own discourse. And they've created enormous value. And then you have institutions that arguably throughout time have created enormous value and can bring enormous value to any artist that's shown in that context. But then you have institutions that don't quite understand what that language is. So what I am experiencing personally at the moment is this very interesting balancing act between trying to invite artists into a conversation that also educates the institution, also educates the broader public, but still is creating value for everybody involved. And it's a very, very strange space to be in. But I also don't think it's something that's entirely restricted to the art world.
So Ben was referring to these artists, and we have 2 artists sitting here, and undoubtedly you had a lot of contact with institutions as well. And so your practices are both like online based, but also you also produce work. And is this problematic in the sense that Ben described it? Like, what is your have you experienced that kind of definition problem or kind of a category problem that you don't fit in categories, and what was the institutional response?
And maybe we can talk also about the idea of like where you place something online, because it's a bit similar to kind of the real world, or like is it the offline world? Yeah.
I think I would agree with what Ben was saying, that this dualistic approach to having the on and the offline is already a bit, it's almost not worth talking about. In physics, you talk about the wave and the particle existing at the same time. In music, you have the remix and the cover, or the main song and the cover version becoming almost simultaneous entities. And I don't think there's a distinction so much to be made. It's also not that the things that happen away from the keyboard get talked about online, or that's the only direction. It's a two-way street. So what happens in a cafe gets talked about on Facebook. What gets talked about on Facebook, or what happens on Facebook, also gets talked about in a cafe. It's really a connected web. And in terms of this term post-internet, it's not really accurate, I think, or I don't feel it makes sense. I would rather propose a retronym. You know, when the acoustic guitar only became the acoustic guitar when the electric guitar was invented. So now we should talk about pre-internet art, and this is just art. So We don't need
and I think that would be very much in line with your position as well, right?
Yeah, well, actually I think there is still some difference to be made between online and offline, because offline art can exist in context like this, at fairs, it can exist in galleries, it can exist in museums, it can sometimes exist outside in the public space. But that's not the place where we are usually meant to find it. Online, I think it works the other way around. No? Artists first started getting into the web as a public platform where they could work outside of institutional and commercial frameworks. And then later institutions and galleries and biennials and so on started coming and started creating context online. And so now online you have this double choice, no? To be on YouTube or to be into an institutional framework. Exactly. And of course working with the institutions online is interesting, but often artists find more and more interesting to create their own platforms and to distribute their work in their own way, no? Without institutional frameworks, and with the chance to always put their work in front of a wider audience and a not professional audience, which is actually what you usually find in a real-world event, no?
But also this distributing art online, we talked about it once, Aleksandra, when you mentioned that you can like kind of decide what work you will produce and where you place it, also in terms of the reaction you get. Maybe you can just talk about a bit about like the beginning when you started to make like video works that you placed online and they kind of caused an immediate reaction that actually helped you understanding in certain points how it works or what is interesting for you, because there's this target audience is immediately there.
Yeah, if you find the right outputs, kind of, yeah. One of my first video works I posted, it was a music video, and I posted it on a music video blog, and immediately at that day I had 20 replies. A really nice critique about the work, which when I did it in the university, there maybe was much less response. So that was very motivational. That, yeah, to have this engagement, immediate engagement.
But you also showed work first online before you actually had bigger exhibitions, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's something where I think, because I started working online, I started exhibiting online, and this is an example where this usual chronology of, you know, you go to an art school, you show in the school, you show in some off space, you show in some galleries, and then slower, bigger spaces, and then internationally, it was completely turned upside down, in our case at least. You know, it was having a website, showing online, you know, meeting people online, and then you show, you know, and a museum in London and a museum in New York, and it was a complete reversal, or kind of the usual chronology.
Do you think it's possible for people to do that now?
I don't know. I think it's yes.
Why?
Just because I think that there was very clearly a very unique period of like 4 or 5 years where it grew to like maybe 150 people. Everybody knew each other's names, and this is where it often gets like accused of being like a ghetto or like an isolated thing that's kind of separate from the mainstream art world. And a lot of people have disavowed certain terms, relationships have broken down and stuff like that. But the thing that I identified from a kind of network's perspective is that the way that everybody ended up being represented by commercial galleries and being shown at institutions and things like that was because there was a very tight-knit network of 150 people globally talking to each other, bigging up each other's work, and like saying this was great, and that slowly like moved into like the kind of dinners at galleries and things like that, and you would like name drop these people, not because you were like devising some kind of strategy, because like actually there was a lot of love between people about like the kind of work that they were producing, and a lot of excitement. And I'm not cynical, because I think that actually there's probably an emergent wave that looks like completely different to that, and I can't identify it, and I don't think many people can identify it, but I think that it would be very different now. I think this, you might be able to jump into the museum space, but I think in a way, maybe all the people that got to do the post-internet golden ticket thing, we've run out of golden tickets. Yeah, right? Yeah. Internet-aware artists.
I would agree, maybe. And I say this, I've said this to you also before, that I probably wouldn't become an artist if there was not for the internet. And it's not because of the technological aspect, of course, but it's because of the people I met there. And that was the inspiring, it was the moment in time, as you say, maybe, I don't know. I don't,
And your contribution towards this first online biennial, how, if you want to talk about it, I mean, just like, what's the approach towards a display?
So obviously, I did end up exhibiting on it, and originally I was asked as an artist, and I said that I wasn't an artist, and so I became a curator, and then I selected a series of works, and I'm not going to say in a damning way, but I am going to say that it was extremely painful. Like the amount of emails that I had to go through in terms of the administrative process to argue, because I mean, I do web development. I have done web development for like since I was 15. I know technically that these things can happen. And the kind of conceptual arguments around we don't want to link out because we want to kind of create this autonomous space and these kind of mirroring of like the gallery space and all of that kind of stuff. It was frustrating. In the end, they agreed to everything and ended up hosting works that were code-based, were download-based. But I guess I could walk away from it saying like their project's completely misguided and stuff like that. But I think there's a couple of like interesting kind of like pivot points in terms of what it means to show this work in an institutional context and why it was useful to me, because I'm now curator of digital, like I'm trying to articulate what the technical requirements are of future platforms, what artists will be happy with, how to support artists showing the kinds of work they want to do, also within the kind of vision that I think that things don't exclusively exist online, and how to articulate that technically. So seeing another institution try and build this thing, and I mean, it was really useful for me. I just watched all the problems that they went through. But I think to go back to the kind of thing of we are the first online Biennale, I think this is another question around institutions, because I don't think it's just we are the first online Biennale. There's countless like articles that come out in things like The Guardian, The New York Times that say the first online gallery, and maybe they say like Bubble Byte, and it's like, well, what about Club Internet? Well, Club Internet has no archive online, so like, and all of these kind of tricky things. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is like, I don't archive my work. Wayback Machine archives some of my work.
And the NSA.
And the NSA, obviously. I thank them for it. I'm kind of interested in how potentially one of the functions for major institutions in this moment is to provide the memory, because I actually don't want to read any more articles in the newspapers about the first online gallery. Like, I would much prefer that a major institution does actually articulate the history as it kind of was, and they can devise a participative model by which other people can make contributions, and they do it sensitively. But I would like to take the step, like the next step, because we're rehashing, and the formats don't make sense.
So I was wondering if there were any questions from the audience at this point. That would be your chance. Yes, here. A microphone is coming.
Hi, my name's Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Fabian. I had a question for Ben regarding the discussion about the relationship between online and offline and the kind of nonsense of that binary. But I wanted to also specifically ask you about the way that what some people like Jay are talking about as like stacktivism, how this notion of like your infrastructural relationships, which are particularly on the surface in a place like London where everybody's poor and there's no space, about how these types of relationships start to feed into the type of work that's being made online and presented, and if there's maybe a way that you could read or understand a lot of things that are being produced as coming out of necessity or coming out of some physical relation that finds the online space as some kind of available place.
Okay. So I guess I have to unpack it a little bit because there are like references to projects that people are doing. So Stacktivism is a project articulated by Jay Springett, which is building on Benjamin Bratton's theory of the stack, which is an attempt to map the geopolitical implications of infrastructure. So at a base level, you can say there are these pipes that connect to this data farm, and this constitutes the physical infrastructure of the internet. And then the question is, who controls these things? And obviously, this is a conversation that's quite important at the moment in the context of the NSA. But again, was in the context of the NSA, 5 years ago, the NSA were buying up data warehouses and data mining services. So it might be a moot point in relation to the NSA. In terms of the necessity, and the kind of work that's born out of this stuff, I think there's a lot of people in this moment that are operating under the role of artist because it's a convenient space, and the kind of configuration of stuff, be it project spaces, be it being able to sit on talk panels and be able to fly around different parts of Europe and meet people and continue a conversation and stuff like that. I think there's some kind of weird crossover between the infrastructure that the art world provides in a kind of post-Fordist context and this kind of conversation that's circulating around how are we going to maintain a free space to produce work online if we don't control any of the services by which we do it. This is maybe bleeding quite far out into outside of the context of this conversation, but I did, I guess I said in the email that I always feel weird talking in a strictly art context, and one of the kind of things that I've arrived at is a realization that the infrastructure by which I want to live my life doesn't exist, so there is a necessity to build it because no one else is going to. And I think actually within the internet community, that describes a desire on the part of many of the people that participated in that early phase. They didn't like the way that the gallery system operated, so they built their own gallery system. And I think this is something that hasn't been able to continue to be built upon because Tumblr replaced surf blogs, and then the new generation that comes to it default to producing things on Tumblr. So hopefully I knitted together those things.
Yeah. Any other questions? I see one there.
Hi, I'm Monica. Very interesting conversation, so thank you. But how far are we from not having to travel to Basel, but a virtual reality space where I can walk into and walk up to sculpture and paintings and experience that in, like a rich game? How far are we from that? I mean, since we are talking about online.
As soon as the porn industry figures it out, then the artwork follows 10 years later. So I don't think actually it will happen ever that one thing replaces the other, or maybe that's going into this binary discussion that makes a distinction. So it's not about or, I think it's more about and, that the two just simultaneously exist.
There is but there are 2 really good crowdfunding campaigns at the moment for some VR setup and like a thing that you wear around your waist so you can physically walk through the space and stuff like that. But I don't think it's going to catch on.
But as artists, how do you feel about that? I mean, as artists, is it something you look forward to where you can exhibit your work here, but more people around the world will be able to walk into that space and have that intimate experience?
That's already the case.
They can already do
Yeah,
that.
we are. I mean, I think my proudest moment is having a video on the front page of YouTube and having 1 million people see it. That's just as real as showing it in a museum. But I think that's not necessarily a novelty. That's already been happening for quite some time.
I think we have time for one last question, yes.
My name is Salon. Just a quick, well, not very quick question. I mean, in time we're living, always art used to be a mirror of society, and mirror reflecting also our problems and, yeah, our general problem in society. So what do you think is the role of an artist, especially today, online? Which role must the artist play in general and more specifically online?
But it's still reflecting our society, but it also depends about, like, talking about what specific kind of artwork you relate to. I mean, talking about digital art or releasing art online, it's of course reflecting a movement or like a change or even already an existing just normal infrastructure of how you distribute information, of how you structure your day, of how you like display. So it's, I mean, this function of art is already quite a question, but I think the mirroring is still given, I find.
Yeah, I think I used to have really big hang-ups about, like, I thought that artists should be responsible for their actions and that they should consider all the materials that they use, that they're ethically sound and all of this kind of stuff. But increasingly, I actually don't think that artists should be forced to have the same responsibilities that other industries and things like that have, because actually I think that, like, a successful artwork emerges from like a process that doesn't have a set of regulations on it, and that actually, yeah, I've totally backtracked on what I thought a year ago. So in terms of, to respond to the question, artists online or offline, like, I would never feel like I'm in a position to tell them.
Okay, yeah, I think we need to finish our conversation now. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here and participating. And thanks again to Fabian and Claudio and the Kunsthalle and Art Basel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fabian.